The air in Lagos was always thick with noise, people talking over one another, the smell of roasted corn floating through the streets. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, chasing something they could not quite touch. But in the middle of that chaos sat a woman no one ever really looked at twice. Her name was Eniola. To most, she was just another beggar by the roadside near Oberland, with dusty feet and a plastic bowl that barely filled halfway. She had not always been like that. There was a time she laughed without fear, when her eyes carried light instead of sorrow. But life had a way of squeezing people until they became unrecognizable. When her husband died in a motor accident, and her small shop got swallowed by a fire the following year, Eniola found herself sitting by that road, whispering to God in between the cries of passing buses. She would sit there every day, her scarf faded from too many suns, her voice cracked from calling out to strangers who mostly ignored her. Yet she noticed things. She saw who gave and who only pretended to. She knew when a politician's convoy was coming before anyone else did. She could tell from the sound of engines and the tension in the air. Lagos had its rhythm, and she had learned to listen. One rainy afternoon, the sky turned dark without warning. Everyone ran for cover, except Eniola. She stayed, holding a torn umbrella that was more holes than fabric. As the water drenched her clothes, a black SUV stopped beside her. The window rolled down, and a woman's face appeared. She looked expensive, the kind of person who smelled like money even in the rain. "Why are you sitting here?" the woman asked, her tone curious, not mocking. Eniola looked up slowly. "Where else should I sit?" she said softly. The woman stared at her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Eniola," she replied. The woman nodded. "Meet me tomorrow at the big office opposite the old post building. Ask for Madam Taif. Tell them I sent you." And just like that, the SUV rolled away, leaving Eniola staring at the puddle where its tires had splashed. She didn't know what had just happened, but something in her chest stirred a tiny spark that refused to die. The next day, she went. The security men almost didn't let her in. Her clothes were worn, her shoes barely held together. But when she mentioned Madam Taif's name, they exchanged looks and allowed her through. Inside, the air smelled of polish and power. Men in suits moved like they had somewhere more important to be. Eniola stood there, clutching her small bag, unsure of what to do. Then Madam Taif appeared again, in a bright wrapper that shimmered under the lights. "You came," she said, smiling faintly. "Good. I didn't know if you meant it," Eniola replied. "I don't say things I don't mean. Sit down." Eniola sat, feeling the cold of the chair seep through her clothes. "I've been watching you," Madam Taif began. "You have something most people don't. You notice things. You read people. You know who they are before they open their mouths." Eniola frowned slightly. "How would you know that?" "Because I've seen you." "You think I just stopped by chance that day?" "No. I've passed that road many times. You see more than others, and I need that." Eniola didn't understand. "Need me for what?" "To listen," Madam Taif said. "To watch. To tell me what you see. I deal with powerful men, Eniola. But power is built on knowing what others don't." And that was how it started. Eniola's life began to shift in quiet, invisible ways. She became an observer, not of the street anymore, but of the city's secrets. Madam Taif paid her, clothed her, and taught her how to blend in. Eniola learned fast. Her sharp eyes became her weapon. Her soft voice carried weight. Weeks passed, then months. Eniola no longer begged for coins. She sat in offices now, her hair neatly tied, her hands holding files that could ruin or rescue men. She still walked through the streets sometimes, not because she needed to, but because she remembered. One evening, as the city lights flickered on, she saw a man who used to mock her when she begged. He had called her names, thrown empty bottles near her feet. Now, he was standing outside the same building she walked out of, trying to get an appointment with Madam Taif. Their eyes met briefly. He looked confused, then ashamed. Eniola smiled, not out of pride, but because life had turned quietly, like a wheel she never knew she was pushing. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning, that her rise would shake the city itself, and the same people who once ignored her would one day kneel in her shadow. Eniola's life had changed faster than she could understand. In a matter of months, the woman who once stretched her hand for coins was now walking through marble floors, speaking in rooms filled with people who decided the fate of Lagos. But even as her clothes changed, her heart carried the memory of those long days on the street, the sound of passing buses, the smell of roasted plantain, the way people avoided her eyes as if poverty were contagious. Madame Taif had become something like a mentor and a mystery all at once. She moved through the world like she owned it. Her words were soft, but her presence carried weight. Politicians whispered her name in private conversations. Businessmen sought her favor. Eniola watched her closely, trying to understand what made her so powerful. One afternoon, Madame Taif called her into a private meeting. The office was large and cold, filled with expensive furniture and silence. "Eniola," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I want you to handle something for me." "What kind of something?" Eniola asked, her hands tightening slightly around her handbag. "There's a contract being discussed between two companies. One wants to cheat the other. I need you to find out who's behind it." Eniola's eyes widened. "Me? How?" Taif smiled. "You're better at reading people than anyone I know. Go there as my assistant. Listen more than you talk. You'll know what to do." That night, Eniola couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the years she had begged under the scorching sun. She had begged for food, not trust. And now, a powerful woman trusted her with business secrets worth millions. It didn't feel real. But the next morning, she wore a modest skirt and blouse, tied her scarf neatly, and followed the driver to the meeting. The meeting was at a tall glass building in Victoria Island. Eniola stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. Everything gleamed: cars, walls, shoes. She felt small again, but she held her head high. Inside, men in suits looked at her like she didn't belong. She smiled politely, pretending not to notice. When the meeting started, she sat quietly in a corner, taking notes, but her real attention was on their faces. She noticed the man on the left kept tapping his pen whenever a certain number was mentioned. Another kept clearing his throat before every lie. She didn't know much about contracts, but she knew human behavior. Afterward, she returned to Madame Taif and told her everything she observed: the hesitation, the eye contact, the strange phrases. Taif listened carefully, then smiled. "You have a gift, Eniola. What you noticed saved us from losing millions." That night, Eniola cried quietly, not from sadness, but from disbelief. For the first time, she felt useful, valuable, like her life finally had meaning. But with new power came whispers. Some of Taif's old allies began to question who this new woman was. They wondered how a street beggar had climbed so quickly. One of them, a man named Chief Duro, didn't hide his suspicion. He was a man who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. One evening, after a long meeting, he approached Eniola. "Madame Taif trusts you too much," he said, his tone dripping with false kindness. "You're smart, but this world is dangerous. Be careful not to fly too close to the sun." Eniola met his gaze. "I don't fly," she said quietly. "I walk and I watch." He chuckled but didn't reply. From that moment, Eniola became more careful. She learned how to read documents, how to ask questions without sounding curious, how to stand in a room full of sharks without bleeding fear. Madame Taif pushed her harder each day, teaching her not just business, but the unspoken rules of power: when to speak, when to smile, and when silence was louder than any word. Months turned into a year, and Eniola was no longer just an assistant. She had become Madame Taif's right hand, the person everyone turned to when they couldn't reach her. She started handling meetings herself. She managed deals, gave speeches, and built connections with people she used to beg from. But the more she rose, the more Lagos began to whisper her name. Some called her the woman who came from dust. Others said she used charms or dark secrets to climb so high. Eniola ignored them, but deep down, she knew power always came with enemies. One rainy night, she was going through files in her office when she noticed something odd. A document was missing from the folder she had arranged earlier that day. It wasn't just any document, it contained information about a government deal worth billions. Her heart began to race. She called Madame Taif immediately, but there was no answer. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Be careful what you touch. Not every paper is yours to hold. Eniola's hands trembled. She looked around the empty office, the ticking of the clock suddenly too loud. She didn't know who had sent it, but she knew it was a warning. The next morning, she found out that the deal had been leaked to the media, and fingers were pointing at her. Rumors spread fast. Some said she sold information. Others claimed she had betrayed Madame Taif. For the first time since her rise, Eniola felt the same cold sting of rejection she once knew on the streets. When she finally met Taif, the woman's face was unreadable. Did you do it? She asked. No, Eniola whispered, tears burning her eyes. I swear on everything I have, I didn't. Taif stared at her for a long time, then turned away. Trust is like glass, Eniola. Once cracked, it never shines the same way again. Eniola stood there, frozen, as Taif walked out of the room. 4 days, she couldn't sleep. She avoided everyone, haunted by the looks of suspicion. But one evening, as she sat by her window watching the streetlights flicker, she remembered something her mother once told her: when life throws you into darkness, become the candle yourself. She decided to fight back, not with noise, but with truth. She started digging quietly, tracing every file, every signature, every person who had touched that deal. What she uncovered made her heart pound. The leak hadn't come from her. It came from Chief Duro, the same man who had warned her not to fly. He had planned it perfectly, setting her up to destroy her relationship with Taif so he could take her place. But he had underestimated her memory. Eniola still had the street in her, sharp, observant, patient. She gathered her evidence and waited for the right moment. During a large business gathering, when all eyes were on Taif and her partners, Eniola stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she presented proof: emails, signatures, hidden transactions. The room went silent. Chief Duro's face turned pale. Taif looked at her, shocked, then proud. You saved me again, she said quietly. Eniola only smiled. No, Ma. I saved myself this time. From that day, everything changed. People no longer saw her as a lucky beggar who got lifted by chance. They saw her as a force of her own, calm, clever, dangerous in the most graceful way. But power never comes without a price. And though she had won this battle, the city of Lagos had not yet shown her its darkest side. The streets she once begged on were now whispering her name again, but this time, with both fear and admiration. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a storm was quietly forming, waiting to test everything she had become. Lagos had changed its rhythm around Eniola. The woman who once begged beside dusty roads now moved through the heart of the city like someone the world had begun to notice. Drivers slowed to stare when her car passed. People whispered her name in markets and offices, unsure whether to fear her or admire her. But Eniola never forgot. Every success felt like a borrowed coat, something that could be taken away if she stopped paying attention. The memory of her old life clung to her not as shame, but as a reminder. Madame Taif, now older and quieter, had started giving Eniola more control. You've grown, she said one morning, sipping her tea. Sometimes I wonder if you even need me anymore. I'll always need you, Eniola replied. But part of her knew things were shifting. The student had begun to stand on her own. That year, Lagos was preparing for elections, and everything smelled like secrets and fear. Money moved like air, unseen but everywhere. Madame Taif's company was being courted by powerful politicians, and Eniola found herself drawn into their world: private dinners, coded conversations, deals made over laughter that didn't reach the eyes. It was in one of those gatherings that she met Governor Adewale, a man who could silence a room just by walking in. He had a voice that carried authority and a smile that could fool the wise. From the moment he saw Eniola, he treated her differently, asking questions others were too proud to ask. "You're not like the rest," he told her one evening as they stood outside on a balcony, the city lights stretching beneath them. "What makes you say that?" she asked. "You listen before you speak. That's power most people don't understand." Eniola smiled politely, though she sensed the danger in his charm. Still, she couldn't deny the thrill of being noticed by someone like him. Over time, their paths crossed often, too often. He would call her for advice, ask her to attend certain meetings in his place. Soon, people began to talk. Madame Taif noticed. "Be careful," she warned one night after a long meeting. "A man like Adewale doesn't just notice women, he uses them." "I know," Eniola replied. "But maybe this time, I can use him too." Taif stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you play this game, play to win." And so she did. Eniola became a silent strategist behind the governor's campaign, advising, connecting, whispering names he should trust and ones he shouldn't. Her instincts rarely failed. She could tell when someone was lying by the way their eyes shifted or how their breath changed. She was no longer the woman who begged for coins. Now, she made decisions that shaped the city's direction. But power has its own hunger. The more she fed it, the more it wanted. One afternoon, a man she hadn't seen in years appeared at her office door. His clothes were worn, his eyes familiar. "Eniola," he said quietly. She froze. "Chaik." He smiled faintly. "You remember me." Chaik had been one of the few people who showed her kindness back when she begged near Oberland. He used to bring her leftover bread from his mother's stall, never asking for anything in return. Seeing him now felt like seeing her old self in human form. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He looked nervous. "I work as a cleaner in this building. I didn't know this office was yours until today. I saw your name on the door and couldn't believe it." Eniola stood up, emotion flooding her chest. "Come in," she said softly. They talked for hours. Chaik told her about his life, how he'd been struggling to care for his mother, how every day felt like a fight to survive. When he spoke, Eniola felt something shift inside her, a reminder that she had climbed far, maybe too far from the people who once stood beside her in the dust. She offered him a job, something small but steady. "You helped me when you had nothing," she said. "Now let me return that." But Chaik wasn't the only ghost from her past. Days later, people began to dig into her story. A newspaper headline appeared one morning. "Who is Eniola, the woman behind the power?" It told parts of her truth and mixed them with lies, claims that she used blackmail, that she manipulated her way into politics, that her rise was a scandal waiting to unfold. Governor Adewale called her immediately. "Ignore them," he said. "You're too valuable for rumors to shake." But it wasn't that simple. The same people who once bowed now looked at her differently. Whispers followed her through hallways. Even Madame Taif grew distant. Late one night, Eniola went home and sat by her window, staring at the city. She could see the lights stretching endlessly, each one representing someone chasing something. Power, love, safety, it didn't matter. Everyone was hungry for something. She thought about how far she'd come and how alone she had become in the process. The woman who once prayed for one meal now sat in a mansion, surrounded by everything except peace. Then came the knock. When she opened the door, two men in dark suits stood there. "We're from the Economic Commission," one said. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding recent transactions tied to the governor's campaign." Her stomach tightened. "I don't understand." "It's routine," the man replied, though his tone said otherwise. They left her with a letter and instructions to appear the next morning. As soon as they walked away, Eniola called Adewale. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. By morning, news had spread. The governor was under investigation for embezzlement, and her name was listed among his close associates. The walls began to close in. Her phones wouldn't stop ringing, reporters, lawyers, old friends pretending to care. Even Madame Taif's call came with silence heavy enough to break something inside her. "I warned you," Taif finally said. "You played with fire." "I was loyal," Eniola whispered. "Power doesn't care about loyalty," Taif replied. "It only respects survival." The investigation dragged on for weeks. Her accounts were frozen, her reputation shredded. People who once smiled at her now crossed the street to avoid her. But Eniola refused to break. She remembered what the streets had taught her: when you have nothing left, that's when you start again. She began gathering her own evidence, tracing every transfer, every message, every person who had moved money under her name. Slowly, a pattern formed. Someone had set her up. Someone who wanted her gone from the game. When she discovered who it was, her blood ran cold. It wasn't a stranger. It was Madame Taif. The woman who lifted her from the streets, who taught her to see the world's hidden strings, had used her as a shield. All those deals, all those secrets, they were never about teaching Eniola power. They were about grooming her to take the fall when things went wrong. Eniola sat alone in her living room, the city outside alive with sound, and felt her heart shatter, not from betrayal, but from clarity. She whispered to herself, "They think they made me. They forgot I was forged in the dirt." And with that, she made a silent promise. She would not beg again. She would not crawl. The same sharp eyes that once watched from the roadside would now watch from above. Because Eniola was done being someone's student. She was about to rewrite the story of Lagos herself. The days after Eniola discovered Madame Taif's betrayal felt heavy, like Lagos itself was pressing against her chest. Everywhere she turned, people watched. Reporters waited outside her gate. Former allies spoke her name only in whispers. But Eniola didn't hide. She walked through the city with calm steps, as if nothing had changed, as if she was still the one pulling the strings. Inside, though, her mind was on fire. She kept remembering that first day Taif had called her gifted. How she'd sat across that glossy desk, believing she'd been chosen because of her sharp eyes, her quiet strength. Now she saw the truth. Taif hadn't chosen her for her mind, she'd chosen her for her convenience. Eniola had been the perfect mask. That night, she didn't sleep. She spread out documents on the floor of her study, each paper a piece of the web that tied her name to the corruption scandal. Every signature, every transaction, every date. Her eyes burned as she traced the pattern again and again until it became clear. Madame Taif had used her identity to sign deals through a shell company. When the investigation began, those trails all led back to Eniola. But what Taif hadn't counted on was Eniola's memory. She remembered every meeting, every conversation, every misplaced document. She had watched quietly for years, and now, that same quiet would become her weapon. She started meeting people one by one: drivers, secretaries, assistants, those who worked for Taif but had been overlooked. She didn't threaten or beg, she listened. She reminded them of the nights Taif made them stay late, the promises she never kept, the lies she told. One by one, they began to talk. Each confession was a spark, and soon, Eniola had fire in her hands. Still, she knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Taif had built her empire through connections that ran deep: politicians, business leaders, and even law enforcement. To take her down, Eniola would need to hit her where she didn't expect it: reputation. She called Chaik, the only person she trusted completely. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when she told him her plan. "I've never been more sure," she replied. "She took everything from me. I'm taking everything back." For weeks, they worked quietly. Chaik reached out to his friends in the media, ones who still cared about truth more than money. Together, they began leaking bits of information not about Eniola, but about Taif. Contracts, properties, fake charities. The city began to hum with suspicion. By the third week, a reporter published a story that changed everything. The headline read, "The Hidden Empire of Lagos' Most Powerful Woman." It detailed how Madam Taif had built her fortune through bribes and fraud, how she'd manipulated people like chess pieces. The news hit like thunder. People who once worshipped her name began to distance themselves overnight. Clients pulled out of deals. Friends stopped returning her calls. Lagos devours weakness, and now, it smelled blood. But Taif didn't go down quietly. Late one evening, Eniola was driving home when her car was forced to stop by two SUVs. Men stepped out, faces hard, voices low. "You should leave Lagos," one said. "Some people think you've said too much." Eniola stared at them calmly. "Tell those people they taught me how to survive. I won't forget that lesson." They hesitated. There was something in her voice that made even danger pause. After a moment, they stepped back, letting her pass. When she reached home, Chaik was waiting. "You can't stay here anymore," he said. "They'll come again." Eniola nodded. "I know." She packed only what she needed: papers, a flash drive, her mother's old photo, and left before midnight. They moved between safe houses, changing cars, changing routes. But hiding wasn't enough. She wanted to end this, not run from it. One morning, she called the investigator who had handled her case earlier, the same man who had once looked at her like she was guilty. "I have information," she said. "Enough to close the case on me and open a bigger one on Taif." He hesitated. "If this is another story." "It's not. Check your email in 10 minutes. When he did, he found everything: bank records, wire transfers, names of foreign accounts, all pointing back to Madam Taif. Within a week, Taif was summoned for questioning. Cameras caught her walking into the commission building, dressed in white, her face as unreadable as ever. Lagos buzzed. People couldn't believe it, the Queen of Power, sitting in the same chair once reserved for those she'd destroyed. Eniola didn't celebrate. She watched from her small apartment window, sipping tea that had gone cold. She felt no joy, only an odd kind of calm. Then something unexpected happened. Governor Adiwale, the man who had vanished when the scandal began, resurfaced. He called Eniola late one night. "I heard what you did," he said. "What did I do?" she asked quietly. "You fought back," he said. "And you won." She laughed without humor. "Winning doesn't bring peace." "Maybe not," he replied. "But it brings respect. Lagos needs someone like you." She frowned. "Someone like me for what?" "For leadership. There's a new movement forming. Independent. Clean. They're looking for someone with your story, someone real." For the first time, Eniola didn't know what to say. She'd spent her life surviving, fighting, learning. Leadership wasn't something she'd ever imagined. "I'm not a politician," she said. "That's exactly why they'll trust you," he replied. She didn't give an answer. After he hung up, she sat there in silence, watching dawn spread across the sky. Birds called faintly in the distance, and the city began to wake again. Weeks passed. Madam Taif's case dominated the news. Her empire collapsed piece by piece. Her partners abandoned her. Eniola never saw her again, though rumors said Taif had fled to another country. Life began to breathe again, slowly. Eniola took her time rebuilding, not the kind of rebuilding that needed glass towers and rich allies, but one that started from the heart. She launched a foundation for women like her, those who had been silenced, overlooked, forgotten. She visited markets, spoke with traders, listened to their stories. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. "Is that not the woman who used to beg near Oberland?" someone would whisper. "No," another would say, "that's the woman who beat the system." Her story began spreading beyond Lagos. Journalists called it the rise of the roadside queen. But to Eniola, it wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. Still, not everyone was happy. Some of the men whose secrets she had exposed were regrouping, planning revenge in quiet corners. One of them, a powerful businessman named Chief Kazim, saw Eniola's new influence as a threat. She thinks she's untouchable, he told his associates. Let's remind her she's not. And so, another storm began to gather. Eniola could sense it. She could feel it in the way people looked at her, half awe, half fear. But she was no longer afraid. The city that had once ignored her now echoed her name in boardrooms and on street corners. She had walked through dirt, through betrayal, through the fire of false accusations, and she had come out alive. Yet she knew the journey wasn't over. Power never sleeps in Lagos. It only changes hands. And this time, Eniola wasn't just trying to survive it. She was preparing to rule it. The wind carried the noise of Lagos that morning, a mix of car horns, voices, and the hum of a city that never truly rested. From her window on the top floor of a modest but elegant building in Ikoyi, Eniola watched the movement below. The same streets where she had once begged were now lines of opportunity she could command with a phone call. She had come a long way, yet she knew this was not the end. The city had crowned her with respect, but Lagos had a habit of turning admiration into envy. Her foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. Women from different corners of the city were joining, many of them with stories that mirrored her own. They spoke about the days when no one listened, about being invisible in a world that moved too fast to care. Eniola listened to all of them. She didn't want to be the kind of leader who forgot where she came from. Still, not everyone saw her rise as something to celebrate. Men like Chief Kazim saw it as a threat. He controlled contracts and connections that had long kept him powerful. To him, Eniola's new voice was a noise that needed to be silenced before it became a roar. One late afternoon, she was leaving an event at a youth center when Chike hurried up to her, his face tense. "Someone's been asking questions about you," he said. "People connected to Kazim's group. They're not looking for stories. They're looking for weakness." Eniola's eyes stayed calm. "Let them look. There's nothing left to find." Chike frowned. "You don't understand. They're not digging into your past, they're trying to rewrite it." That night, she sat alone in her office, lights dim, the city's glow faint beyond the window. Her name had once been dirt, then gold, and now it was being painted black again. That was how Lagos worked: build you up, tear you down, watch how you stand afterward. The next day, a story appeared online. It claimed her foundation was a front for political funding. They said she was using it to launder money for hidden allies. It was a lie, but a well-crafted one, with forged documents and anonymous sources. Calls started pouring in. Donors wanted answers. Partners began withdrawing their support. Within 48 hours, the organization she had built with her soul was under fire. Eniola didn't react publicly. She had learned long ago that panic was what enemies wanted. Instead, she called a private meeting with her closest team. "Whoever's behind this is organized," she said. "They have access to records, to networks. That means we don't fight with noise. We fight with proof." Chike looked at her across the table. "And if the proof points to someone too powerful to touch, then we make the truth louder than power," she replied. Over the next week, Eniola and her small group worked quietly, tracing the source of the smear campaign. They found that the documents came from one of Chief Kazim's companies, a shell firm registered under another name. It was almost perfect, except for one thing. A signature. The same sloppy scrawl used in old land deals years ago. Eniola smiled when she saw it. "That's all we need." She called a journalist she trusted, a young woman named Teo who had been covering corruption stories for years. "If I give you something," Eniola said, "can you protect it until the right moment?" Teo's voice was steady. "If it's the truth, I'll protect it with my life." Days later, the news broke. The headline read, "The power behind the smear: how a business tycoon tried to silence Eniola." It was detailed, factual, undeniable. Within hours, Chief Kazim's name flooded every conversation. The city turned against him. His allies began distancing themselves the same way they once had from Taif. But Eniola didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She had learned that revenge was temporary, but legacy was permanent. She wanted to build something that would outlive every attack. The noise slowly faded, and her foundation began to recover. Donations returned, support grew stronger, and her image once again shone brighter. Yet, despite the victory, Eniola felt something shifting inside her. One evening, she went back to Oberland. She left her car at the edge of the street and walked through the same place she had once sat, begging with an old bowl in her hand. The ground was the same, the smells were the same, even the faces seemed familiar, though the years had changed everything. She found an old woman sitting by the roadside, thin and quiet. She looked like Eniola once did, forgotten but hopeful. Eniola walked over, knelt beside her, and placed some money gently in her hand. The woman looked up, her eyes wet. "God bless you, my daughter." Eniola smiled faintly. "He already has." For a long time after that, she stood there, watching the street. People hurried past, just like before, stepping around the woman as if she were invisible. But Eniola no longer felt anger. She felt understanding. The world didn't change for you, you changed so you could survive the world. When she returned home, she called a meeting with her board members. "We're changing direction," she said. "No more just talk. We start acting. Real change. We'll train women, build shelters, create jobs. We're going to make sure no one has to beg to be seen." It took months, but the results began to show. Market women started getting small business grants. Young girls from the slums were given scholarships. Former street beggars were being trained in new trades. Lagos began to notice, not because of the money she spent, but because she did something rare: she kept her promises. By the second year, she had become more than a local name. People from other states invited her to speak, to share her story. Her voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Then came the offer she never expected. A national political group reached out to her, asking her to run for office. They said Nigeria needed new blood, new vision, someone who knew both sides of life. The same Governor Adewale, now a presidential candidate, backed her publicly. "If anyone deserves power," he said, "it's someone who knows how to live without it." The proposal made her quiet for days. She sat alone often, thinking about what it would mean. Politics was not her dream, but it was the one place where she could move the walls that had kept people like her small. When she finally agreed, it wasn't with grand speeches or banners. She simply said, "I'll serve because I know what it means to be forgotten." Her campaign was different. She didn't rely on billboards or promises. She went from market to market, from slum to suburb, telling her story. People cried when she spoke. They saw themselves in her words, the loss, the hope, the fight. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She spoke about her mistakes, her pain, her journey. The election season in Lagos was wild: noise, colors, arguments, but something about Eniola's story cut through it all. The people who never voted before came out. They said, "She's one of us." When the results finally came in, the streets erupted. She had won. Not by luck, not by influence, but by truth. As she stood before a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see, she felt tears in her eyes. She could see faces, old, young, rich, poor, all chanting her name. Eniola raised her hand and said, "I came from the ground you walk on. I begged on these same streets. I was stepped on, ignored, forgotten. But I learned something: you don't need permission to rise. You only need to believe you can." The cheers drowned the air. Lagos, for once, felt united. That night, after everyone had gone home, Eniola walked out alone to the same balcony where she used to meet Madame Taif years ago. The city glittered below her like a living thing. She thought about the girl she once was, the one who had sat by the roadside, holding a plastic bowl, hoping for mercy. She whispered to the wind, "You see now, Mama? Your daughter made it." The night didn't answer, but the city lights seemed to nod back, glowing a little brighter. And there, under the vast Lagos sky, Eniola smiled not because she had conquered power, but because she had finally learned how to use it. The beggar had become more than the most powerful woman in Lagos. She had become the proof that even from the dust, destiny could bloom. And that's how Eniola's story turned from pain to power, from the roadside to the heart of Lagos itself. She taught us that life can break you, shape you, and still bless you if you refuse to give up. No matter where you're watching this from, remember, your beginning doesn't decide your ending. The streets didn't define Eniola, she defined herself. And so can you. If this story touched your heart, hit that **subscribe button, drop a comment and tell us which country you're watching from and what time it is right now where you are We'd love to know who's sharing this moment with us across the world. More powerful stories are on the way, don't miss them.